I would like to open this video with a murder. It is said that Constantine the Great killed his own wife by suffocating her in a Roman bath. The crime that ended her life varies depending on the source examined, but invariably, her husband saw fit to have her killed. While a source reports that Forster died of cold poison, by far the most popular version of her death was at the hands of a bath. In one account, Forster was supposedly killed by the excessive heat of boiling bath waters. A more common account is that Constantine locked Forster in a room with an overheated bath, which suffocated her to death. Most people familiar with modern bathing would find this possibility unusual. To kill an adult woman by heating up bathwater sounds more creative than it does practical. However, a similar anecdote occurs in earlier Roman history, when an invading general, a man named Hannibal, killed Roman senators by suffocating them in an identical manner. Ostensibly, these baths are not the baths most people are familiar with. These stories took place in much larger facilities using much different technologies in an age before tap water. It's fitting to say that Roman baths were extremely important social institutions that served multiple purposes throughout the empire's history, and thus held an often overlooked importance in their society, outside of basic hygiene. Our focus will be in the Imperial Baths of Rome, and the role they played for the citizens of Rome. It's often greatly understated just how important they were in the daily life of a Roman, and I want to explore just how socio-politically relevant they actually were. Roman Imperial Baths were by far the biggest and most luxurious bathing establishments available in the Roman Empire. Where regular bathhouses were oftentimes significantly smaller in size and modest in decor, their imperial brothers vastly outdid them in every aspect. It's accurate to state that the Roman Imperial Baths were gargantuan facilities of leisure and commerce. The sheer size and scale of these baths are not to be understated. The Baths of Trajan, for example, measures more than 330 meters by 340 meters, well over 3 football fields. Fittingly, this leaves space for a great deal of commodities and rooms that we must explore to gain an understanding as to what these institutions were. The first thing that must be known is that there were two major things that made all of ancient Rome's baths as interesting as they were. Those things were socializing and the usage of heat. The Romans considered bathing to be a deeply social and luxurious activity. As a matter of fact, drinking, gambling, sex and bathing stood shoulder to shoulder in the eyes of a Roman pleasure seeker, and it's not hard to see why. Within the heated and gorgeously decorated walls of the imperial baths, cheap wine, good food and warm waters were available, giving even the poorest of citizens a beautiful gaze into the world of the elite. But let us take one step at a time. First, we should discuss the wider importance of socializing in heat in the Roman baths, and by extension, their larger imperial counterparts. The aforementioned luxurious environments manifested in a series of heated rooms. The most important rooms in the bathing complex, the tepidarium, caldarium, and frigidarium. The tepidarium was a room with moderate heat. It perhaps served to warm up a bathgoer before they entered into the caldarium. It's not believed that these rooms contained any water, so it's more likely they were enjoyed as warm rooms with hot air. The caldarium was hotter than the tepidarium, but it also came with a cold water basin, allowing people to pour cold water over their heads as they left the room. The waters in the frigidarium, however, were not heated. The frigidarium was a cold room. There would have been space to immerse and interact with other peoples for long periods of time, while eating the various food items on sale. A large and extensive open-air swimming pool would have also been typically available. That said, there were various amenities exclusive to the Roman Imperial Baths. Smaller facilities may not have had the following, making their imperial counterparts more desirable by comparison. As mentioned, food stores allowed people to eat and drink as they submerged. As a matter of fact, there are stories of Romans entering the baths and leaving completely intoxicated. For the more sober bathgoers, a service in the interest of further hygiene was for sale: oiling and scraping. The Romans often preferred a method of cleansing, wherein they would often boil olive oil onto themselves and scrape their skin down. However, amenities were not confined to aquatic activities. On the contrary, imperial baths came to be associated with other forms of leisure. For an academic, libraries and lecture halls were abundant. A Roman with fitness goals in mind may do exercise in the designated courts, wherein ball games and sports like wrestling could be enjoyed. All of these took place in large, beautiful facilities adorned in marble and granite. Statues depicting mythological scenes would have graced the facility, adding to a sense of grandeur that a bathgoer might have. These alone were not the bread and butter of the bath's popularity. What made bathing so popular was it granted Roman citizens the ability to experience the great elite luxuries for a very, very low cost. Imperial baths were often incredibly affordable, and even the urban poor could afford to get in. In fact, on festival days, it was sometimes completely free, making attendance incredibly viable. It may be worth taking a step back to analyze how we got to this point. You see, the story of the Imperial Baths begins many centuries before its birth. At some point in the Hellenistic period, it's believed that local Italic customs of relaxing in heated spring waters were married with Greek customs of bathing. These customs came with the Greek hypercourse technologies. We begin to see the staples of the Roman bath: public bathing and heated waters. Despite that, we are still a ways away from the imperial bath. There are no gymnasiums, no rooms arranged in a clear gradation of heat, no symmetry. As a matter of fact, these facilities weren't very big at all. As you might expect, a complex and multifaceted institution like this can rarely emerge fully formed. One might wonder how the imperial baths came into being. As a matter of fact, during these days, it could even be argued that public bathing was not at all that popular. After all, Seneca once lamented on the pious modesty of the simple conservative bathing practices that Scipio Africanus underwent during the late 3rd century BCE. Seneca's moral letters portray Scipio's home as being a small stone house. His private bath, where he groomed himself, is described as being a small bath, buried in darkness, according to the old style. It is noted that his ancestors did not think one could have a hot bath except in darkness. This far cry from the lavish public imperial baths is noticed by Seneca, who claims to take pleasure in contrasting the practice from those of his debaucherous contemporaries. How popular public baths were, and whether or not Seneca's word can be taken to reflect this, is not worth dwelling on, at least at this moment in time. All that needs to be known is that by the late Republic, during the 1st century BCE, it was a well-known and established cultural aspect of Roman civilization. The birth of Roman imperial baths was, of course, very soon to follow. It is in this cultural environment that when the great general Marcus Agrippa died in the final years of the 1st century BCE, leaving his large complex to the people in his will, a significant step was made towards the formation of the Imperial Bath. It is believed that the baths of Agrippa were maintained by a steady stream of income for years before Agrippa's death through an admission fee. However, it was only with his death, when it became property of the people, that free admission into his baths became possible. What's important about the baths of Agrippa was that it was a behemoth of a structure that was designed to give the people a taste of his luxurious elite life. It vastly exceeded its predecessors in size and the luxuries it provided. Many of the hallmarks of what we described above were present. While it was not built in a symmetrical way, and it was way smaller than some of its grandiose brothers, it cannot be understated that the Roman people grew this as a great commodity. Extending an olive branch to the people of Rome to offer to them an experience of living an elite life became a driving philosophy, baked intrinsically into the construction of these megalithic structures. The following century saw the construction of the Baths of Nero, which completely outshone Agrippa's in size, spectacle, and grandeur. As the 2,000-year-old adage goes, what worse than Nero, what better than Nero's baths? Now that we have a strong concept of what the Imperial Baths were and the history they've had in getting to this point, we can finally ask the question, what effect did they have on the larger empire? There are two major facets that I believe are worth focusing on in order to gain an understanding of this question: healthcare and politics. Roman baths had medical and political implications that had immediate effects on the everyday going of the city. These points should help to illustrate just how important baths were in serving these purposes and what made them so popular amongst business owners and politicians. Good hygiene was one of the major reasons to take a bath, especially after a long day. The Romans believed in good hygiene and recognized the correlation between staying clean and not dying a premature death to malediction. However, what other effect did Roman baths have on the empire's ability to produce healthy citizens? Roman physicians consulted the baths to answer these same questions. The concept of thermal waters and medicine was toyed with by medical writers of the Roman period, with Pliny the Elder ascribing cures and properties to different kinds of water. Some writers advised people to bathe in hot or cold waters, oftentimes depending on whatever was the opposite of the affliction they had. For example, one may wish to immerse in cold water if they are stricken with high temperatures. As such, the baths were a popular location to attempt these therapies. The benefit of modern medicine may lead us to discredit the extent of these remedies' effectiveness, but theoretically, it's also been acknowledged that these may have induced placebo effects on Rome's citizens, allowing them to work extra days under the pretense that they had been cured. Despite this, to call these aquatic procedures ineffective would not be an inaccurate assertion. As a matter of fact, it may surprise you to learn that Rome's baths may in fact have been a very large health risk. The imperial baths, unlike Rome's smaller bathhouses, were constantly filtered out with new waters from the aqueducts, and seldom did the baths ever reuse the same water. While pathogens subsequently did not have time to fester for very long, current studies have shown that every bath in Rome provided more than enough space and time to spread parasitic eggs and contagions. Farmers would have interacted frequently with feces as a result of the kind of excrement-based compost that they used. It may not surprise you to learn that this soil often carried nefarious microorganisms that weren't good for human health. Various worms and diseases could be spread through bathwaters and transmitted to slave and senator alike. While the implications this had on their lifespan and health is not fully understood, you can imagine the role this may have played during epidemics. The devastating Antonine Plague during the 2nd century CE is believed by some to have been caused by smallpox. And while I've yet to see works discussing the relationship between hygiene and its spread, I would like to put forward the suggestion that, given diseases like smallpox are spread through saliva and fluids, baths are a perfect location for a spread to occur. This is not conclusive, and this is my own suggestion, but this does reveal one of many kinds of ways that the health risks associated with baths may have affected Roman civilization. Nonetheless, all that we know for certain was that Roman baths had a varying effect on the health of the people that visited them. While it cannot be understated that the baths were cleansing and a superior alternative to abstinence, they also introduced unique health risks that just as easily presented the threat of epidemics. The political role imperial baths played was significantly more nuanced by stark comparison, albeit equally multifaceted. On the surface, they were a space for the emperors to promote themselves, I want you to take a moment to place yourself into the shoes of a lower class Roman citizen. Stepping into the baths, you will be greeted with mythological scenes, recreated meticulously with the finest marble artistry available. Married bountifully with decorations with fine metals, be it gold or bronze, and the sheer expanse of the facility, you would not be completely amiss to ascribe an almost Olympian, divine aesthetic to the experience. In this way, Imperial Baths can be said to represent the Emperor's mastery over the world. Imagine further the gargantuan, powerful aqueducts carrying incredibly high volumes of water into Rome. Imagine the still burning infernos within the facility's furnaces. The product of these powerful natural forces is the commodity you, bathgoer, is enjoying. We may take for granted the presence of fire and water in our world, but for those who lacked hot water taps and lived thousands of years before the household radiators, this casual mastery over the world's elements is, on of itself, awe-inspiring. For a citizen, perhaps, the name of the man that was able to generate these nigh mythological monuments and technologies could only be the name of a great man, and perhaps support and deference were soon to follow. This is where the Baths of Caracalla comes in. Standing as one of the biggest baths ever built in Rome, it also doubles as a political piece and a monument glazed in paranoia. Allow me to explain. It is believed to have been built by Septimius Severus and finished by his son, the Emperor Caracalla. For all of its splendor and luxuries, it was a work of paranoia and uncertainty. You see, Septimius Severus had usurped the throne and established the Severan dynasty. An emperor in his position must be prepared to make every expense to establish support. Public disfavor could result in riots. Disfavor amongst the elite could result in a lethal dosage of poison being slipped into your dinner. As you might imagine, this logic was the father of the Baths of Caracalla, in an attempt to further buy the favour of both the elite and the people. With that said, can it be said that a good imperial bath could sway public opinion by itself? While Septimius Severus is remembered decently in our historical records, Caracalla, whom the baths were eventually named after, would go down in history as a deeply flawed monarch, to put it lightly. History remembers him as being cruel and megalomaniacal, which I believe was far from the intention of the bath's construction. Much like gladiatorial games, baths could only strategically create favour amongst citizens. As we've gone through great lengths to discuss, they were extremely popular and inspired a great sense of grandeur. We have explored baths as a quasi-divine experience that could have even painted the emperor as being the master of the universe. We have explored the basic social functions that baths play to make life considerably more enjoyable. But none of that could hold a candle when standing in the midst of a terrible storm of tyranny and an overall bad reign. Therefore, we cannot accurately gauge the importance that baths may have played in garnering support across Roman society, and to what extent they were seen as political tools. But an examination of these incidents reveals that the relationship was likely complicated. As expected, baths alone could never salvage an unpopular reign, but they would most certainly strengthen an ongoing relationship. As such, when understood as tools of self-promotion and a projection of power, their effectiveness could likely be seen at its strongest point. As the thousands of Roman citizens who frequented the baths would gaze upon the magnificent structures and ascribe the otherworldly experience to none other than the man who had commissioned its construction. It's hard to discern the full extent of an impact that a cultural staple might have on a civilization. Say, we take for granted the microwave, but how much different, how much healthier, and how much more inconvenient might our lives be without it? In the case of the Roman bath, even after spending as much time as we did delving into potential medical implications, the immediate political roles it served, and even after declaring bountifully that the baths were important social institutions, necessities in the social life of an imperial Roman, a full picture does not begin to emerge. Effects on the Roman military, provinces, and Christianity are amongst the many things we did not touch upon that may be affected by something as simple as this custom. However, with this conversation, we have toyed with the idea that something as unsuspecting as a bath may have influenced the tides of Roman civilization in ways we might not expect. Every innovation pioneered by society, no matter how insignificant, creates an echo. For something as momentous yet mundane as the Imperial Bath, the echo it creates is capable of indirectly shaking the walls of history. To us, 2,000 years later, this echo is only a faint sound. We may never fully appreciate the girth of its source. We may never fully realize the full extent of its effect on Roman civilization, but it teaches us that every aspect of a society is therefore worth studying, to paint a more accurate picture of how they lived and why they faced the struggles they did. For that, I believe the Roman Imperial Bath is worth acknowledging.